Before we begin the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us where you watched it in the comments. The late afternoon light was fading across the plains, dropping a cool shadow over Elias Ward's cabin. He had just finished setting a new hinge on the barn door when he heard hoofbeats slowing near the fence line. He straightened, wiping dust from his hands, expecting a neighbor or a passing rider. Instead, he saw a familiar shape on horseback. Thin posture, steady grip, long dark hair braided in a way he remembered from months ago. Aiona. Her presence stopped him cold. She dismounted slowly, holding her side as if the movement caused pain. Elias felt his chest tighten. She had left without asking him for anything. He had assumed she would never return. Aiona approached the porch with careful steps. Her deerskin clothing was worn, the stitching loose in places. A faint tremble moved through her hands. She looked like someone who had walked for days without proper rest. Elias opened the door wider, unsure of his words. He and Aiona shared a history that neither of them had ever spoken about openly. Elias Ward, once a ranch hand and later a drifter, had settled on this quiet edge of town to escape trouble he could never fully outrun. Years earlier, he had lost his younger brother during a cattle raid gone wrong. The sheriff blamed bandits. Elias blamed himself. Since then, he kept a distance from other people, believing he caused damage whenever he got too close. Aiona, a young Apache woman, had survived a violent raid on her village. Her family had scattered or been killed, leaving her alone and forced to trust no one. When she reached Elias's cabin during a bitter winter night, wounded and desperate for shelter, he had taken her in. What happened between them that night had not been planned or driven by desire. It was two lonely people seeking warmth and safety in the same place at the same time. In the morning, she thanked him quietly and walked away. Now she stood on his doorstep again, breathing hard, eyes unsteady yet determined. "Elias," she said softly, "I need to speak to you." He nodded and stepped aside. She entered with slow movements, glancing around the room as if searching for a safe place to stand. Elias felt a nervous pull in his stomach. He sensed something serious, something she had carried for miles. The silence stretched until she finally looked at him. Her hands rested on her stomach in a protective way he had not noticed at first. The small swell beneath her clothing sharpened every worry in his mind. "After that night," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I became pregnant by you." The air in the cabin tightened. Elias's breath caught. His eyes shifted instinctively to her belly, then back to her face. He felt a sudden rush of fear, not fear of her, but fear of the weight of what she had just placed in his hands. A wave of guilt hit him. Did I take advantage of her that night? Did she feel forced? Did I cause more trouble for someone who had already lost everything? He swallowed hard. His throat felt dry. He tried to speak and failed the first time. Aiona's expression did not accuse him. It held more vulnerability than anger, more uncertainty than blame. She was scared too, scared of standing alone, scared of what might come next. Elias stepped closer, not touching her, just tried to steady his voice. "Are you certain?" She nodded once. "Yes, and I came because I had nowhere else to go. I need safety for the child, and I needed to tell you the truth." Her honesty shook him. He had lived years hiding from the truth inside himself. Now this woman, hurt, alone, carrying a life she did not plan for, trusted him with something irreversible. His mind raced. If I say nothing, I become the coward people already think I am. If I turn her away, I send her back into danger. If I accept this, I must change my life completely. The decision weighed heavily, but the answer rose from a place deeper than fear. He met her gaze fully. She watched him with the kind of patience that came from surviving too many hard roads. His voice came out low and steady. "Then be my wife." Aiona inhaled sharply, as if she had prepared for many reactions except this one. She searched his face, looking for hesitation or dishonesty. She found neither. Elias wasn't offering passion, nor was he offering rescue. He was offering a promise shaped by responsibility, respect, and the knowledge that both of them had suffered enough loneliness. Her shoulders eased slightly. Not relief, just the start of it. She stepped further into the cabin. Elias closed the door behind her, feeling the weight of a new path settling on his shoulders. He wasn't ready. She wasn't either. But they were here, for reasons bigger than comfort, bigger than fear. Aiona set her small bag on the table. Elias watched her with a mix of uncertainty and resolve. Two people who had been running from their past now stood facing their future, cautiously and without illusions. The chapter ends with both of them in the same room again, strangers in many ways, bound by one night neither fully understood, preparing to build something neither of them expected to find. Aiona set her small bag on the table and stood quietly, as if waiting for Elias to tell her where she belonged. The cabin was warm from the stove, but she held her arms close to her body, unsure of how much space she was allowed to take. Elias felt the weight of that uncertainty. He pulled a chair away from the table so she could sit, then lit another lantern to brighten the room. She watched his movements with careful attention, the way someone watches a place they are trying to understand. He realized she had arrived with nothing more than a few clothes and herbs wrapped in cloth. The bag looked too light for someone preparing for motherhood. Elias made a mental note to gather the supplies she would need, but he did not voice it yet. He sensed she needed time to breathe. "You can stay in the bedroom," he said, motioning toward the small door near the back wall. His voice came out steady, though his thoughts ran unevenly. He wondered if offering the room was enough, or if she expected him to act differently now that they were bound by his promise. He questioned whether she felt safe sharing a home with a man she barely knew. Aiona nodded. She took a slow step toward the door, but paused when she noticed the bed was neatly made with a clean wool blanket. Elias had always slept there alone. She turned back to him, unsure. "Where will you sleep?" she asked. Elias pointed to the cot near the stove. "Here, it's fine." She gave a faint nod and went inside the small room. Elias stayed where he was, listening to her movements, soft, organized, deliberate. She was not the frightened woman who had come to him months ago, though she still carried weariness. Her resilience was clearer now, shaped by everything she had endured before reaching his door. He began sweeping the floor, an unnecessary task, but one that kept his hands occupied. The truth of her pregnancy still sat heavily on him. He wondered whether she had been alone the entire time, whether she had suffered pain or hunger without anyone to help her. He hoped she would tell him in her own time. Aiona emerged from the room a few minutes later. She approached the stove, holding the water pot he kept there. "May I prepare tea?" she asked. "Of course," Elias said. "Use whatever you need." She set dried leaves into the pot, using a small bundle from her bag. The scent that spread through the cabin was clean and sharp. Elias recognized it from the herbs she used to treat her wounds the first night he met her. She placed 2 cups on the table and sat across from him without speaking. It wasn't silence from discomfort, more like neither of them wanted to rush into questions. He finally spoke. "How long have you been traveling?" 2 weeks, she answered. "I stayed by the river for a while. I thought someone from my village might return, but no one did." Her voice was level, but Elias saw the tension in her jaw. She had hoped for her people, and the disappointment had followed her all the way here. "Did you have trouble on the road?" he asked. "Only some," she said. "A group of men passed near the river camp one night. I hid until they left." Her hand rested again on her stomach. I could not risk being seen. The thought of her alone, carrying his child, hiding in darkness while danger rode by, pushed something firm and heavy into Elias's chest. He understood now why she had come back. She was not asking for charity. She was seeking safety, something she could no longer secure on her own. Aiona took a sip of tea before speaking again. "If you want me to follow your ways here, I can. I do not know how you expect me to live as your wife." Elias felt heat rise in his throat. Not embarrassment, but the weight of responsibility. "I don't want you to follow anything that isn't true to you. We'll figure it out one day at a time. All I ask is that you feel safe here." Her eyes lowered, considering his words, studying the sincerity behind them. "I don't know what a safe place feels like anymore," she said quietly. "I'll learn what you need," Elias said, "and I'll make sure this is a place you don't have to leave." She looked at him for a long, steady moment. He could see she needed to understand what kind of man he was, not with stories or big promises, but with consistent actions. Months ago, he had offered her warmth for one night. Now he was offering something larger, something he wasn't sure he deserved, but knew he had to uphold. Aiona finished her tea and stood. I should rest. The child tires me quickly. Elias nodded. If you need anything, knock on the wall. I'll hear it. She gave him a brief, grateful glance before returning to the bedroom. The door closed softly behind her. Elias remained at the table, staring into the quiet room. The lantern light showed the worn floorboards, the tools stacked by the door, the shelves he had kept in order for years. Everything looked the same, yet felt completely changed. He understood now that he was no longer living alone with his regrets. There was a future forming in the next room, and he had accepted it the moment he asked her to be his wife. He extinguished the lantern, laid down on the cot, and listened to the subtle sound from the bedroom. A shift on the mattress, a quiet exhale, the faint creak of wood settling under new weight. These sounds brought a calm he had not felt in years. They meant she was here, alive, and no longer wandering alone. The night settled over the cabin, and for the first time in a long while, Elias felt the beginning of purpose shaping around him. Steady, demanding, and real. The morning began with a pale light filtering through the thin curtains of the cabin. Elias stood at the stove, frying a simple meal of eggs and bread. He had woken early, unsure whether Aiona slept well, unsure whether she felt like she truly belonged in the space she now shared with him. He kept the noise minimal, trying not to disturb her, but she stepped out of the bedroom quietly before the food finished cooking. She carried herself with a calm alertness, the way someone does when they're still learning if their surroundings are safe. Elias noticed she had braided her hair tighter and adjusted her clothing so her stomach was less visible. It was clear she wasn't ready for strangers to inspect her condition. He offered her a seat at the table and placed a plate in front of her. She touched the food gently, as if testing whether she had permission to eat freely. He knew she had lived through hunger more times than she would admit, so he added another slice of bread to her plate without comment. While they ate, Elias considered the tasks ahead. She would need proper clothes for the changing weather, food for the coming weeks, and blankets suited for childbirth. The cabin had enough to sustain him alone, but not a growing family. The supplies in town were necessary, and avoiding that trip was no longer an option. We'll ride to town today, he said. There are things you'll need. Aiona paused her chewing, her expression tightening in a way that revealed immediate concern. It is not easy for people there to see me, she said. They look with anger or fear. I know, he replied. I won't let anyone speak to you in a way that causes harm. She studied him for a moment, searching for signs of hesitation. Finding none, she nodded once, accepting his decision even though it clearly unsettled her. They finished eating in silence. Elias saddled his horse and brought out a second one, an older mare he had kept mostly for hauling supplies. Aiona touched the horse's neck, whispering something in her language to calm the animal. For the first time since she arrived, a faint warmth showed in her face. Elias realized she missed speaking words that belonged to her past. Once they were ready, they rode toward town at a steady pace. Aiona sat straight but tense. She kept her cloak pulled forward, partly hiding her belly and partly shielding herself from the eyes she expected to meet. The town came into view slowly. Simple buildings, wooden sidewalks, and a few early risers moving between shops. When they entered the main street, conversations quieted. Several people glanced their way, some with surprise, others with the same suspicion Aiona remembered. She lowered her gaze, gripping the reins tightly. Elias guided his horse closer to hers. Stay beside me, he said in a low voice. They stopped at the general store. Elias dismounted first and held the reins for her. She hesitated, but finally stepped down, adjusting her cloak again. As they walked toward the entrance, two men standing near a wagon paused their conversation to stare openly. One shook his head, muttering something under his breath. Aiona stiffened, but continued walking. Inside the store, the owner straightened from behind the counter and cast a cautious look at her. Elias began gathering the items they needed: flour, dried meat, candles, fabric, and a set of blankets. When he brought them to the counter, the owner ignored Aiona entirely and spoke only to Elias. "Anything else?" he asked sharply. "A dress," Elias answered. "One suited for colder days." The owner hesitated. "For her?" "Yes." The man gave a short exhale, not quite approval and not quite refusal. He retrieved a folded dress from the back shelf and placed it down without looking at Aiona. She reached to touch it, but stopped when the owner's eyes shifted toward her hand. Elias placed the money down harder than necessary. The counter rattled slightly. "We're done." He carried the supplies outside before she could say a word. Aiona followed, her steps quick but controlled. Once they were clear of the doorway, she released a slow breath, the tension leaving her shoulders in small waves. "You did not need to defend me," she said. "Yes, I did," he replied. "You shouldn't be treated like that." She held the dress close to her chest, the fabric pressed against her cloak. "People fear what they do not know. My presence reminds them of things they choose not to face." Elias didn't argue. Her voice carried quiet truth born from years of being pushed aside. He lifted her onto the mare and secured the supplies. As they prepared to leave, a woman standing in front of the bakery watched them with a softer expression than the others. She approached hesitantly. "Miss," the woman said to Aiona, keeping her tone gentle, "if you need warmer clothes later, I make them for families outside town. I don't charge much." Aiona blinked, surprised by the kindness. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. Elias noticed how that simple gesture eased something inside her. As they rode home, she spoke for the first time without holding her voice back. "When I left my village, I thought I would carry everything alone," she said. "It is strange to have someone walking beside me." "I'm not going anywhere," Elias answered. She looked at him, not with immediate trust, but with a growing recognition that his words matched his behavior. The road stretched ahead, leading back toward the quiet land they were now shaping into a home. By the time they reached the cabin, the tension she carried in the morning had lessened. She unfolded the dress the moment they entered, examining the stitching with careful fingers. Elias set the rest of the supplies down and watched her for a moment. For the first time since she returned, he saw her imagining a future here. Aiona placed the dress on the bed, turned toward Elias, and said quietly, "I will try to live in this place as if it belongs to me." He nodded. "It does." The sun lowered behind the hills, filling the cabin with an even quietness. They had stepped into town as two uncertain people in a hostile world. They returned as something closer to a pair learning how to stand together. The day had answered questions neither of them had said aloud: whether they could survive judgment, whether the world would make room for them, and whether they could begin shaping a life that did not depend on fear. Inside the cabin, the air felt different now. It felt like the beginning of a home. The quiet after their return from town lingered through the next day. The weather shifted quickly, bringing colder winds that swept across the open land. Elias woke early to stack more wood near the cabin, knowing the nights would deepen with cold soon. He checked the roof for loose shingles and made sure the barn door he repaired held firm. The sight of Aiona's dress laid neatly over the chair inside kept reminding him that the cabin no longer served just his needs. Everything he did now required more care, more preparation, more foresight. Aiona stepped out of the bedroom carrying the dress against her chest. She had sewn small adjustments into the waist to make room for her growing stomach. Her movements were steady but slower than before, and Elias noticed her breathing deepen when she bent to lift something. She caught him watching and straightened up. "The child grows faster each day," she said. "I feel weight in my legs." "You should rest more," Elias replied. "I rest enough," she answered calmly. "My body knows how to carry life. I only need warmth and quiet when the pains come." He accepted her words, though he still kept track of every winch she tried to hide. By noon, the wind began to howl, pushing thick clouds across the sky. The air turned sharp, and small flakes of snow drifted sideways against the windows. Elias shut the shutters and pushed extra wood into the stove. The sudden storm forced them to stay inside, giving them a day that offered no tasks outside and no visitors passing by. Aiona sat near the stove mending a ripped sleeve Elias had worn for years. She kept her hands busy with precise stitches, the thread moving like something she had been trained to do since childhood. Her quiet concentration filled the cabin with a calm sense of purpose. Elias worked beside her, sharpening tools and checking his gear, though his attention often drifted her way. They lived in silence for hours, but it was not the uncomfortable kind that followed strangers. It was the type that gave space to breathe, space to understand the other person's presence without forcing conversation. The storm outside made the walls creak, yet the room held steady warmth. At one point, Aiona paused her sewing. Her hands rested on her lap, the sleeve laid neatly across her knees. Elias sensed something shifting in her mood, something she hadn't voiced yet. "I left behind more than my home," she said, her tone low. "There were people who survived the raid. Some were taken. Some fled in another direction. I have wondered every night if any of them found safety." Elias set down the tool he'd been polishing. The truth of her fear had been present since she returned. He had seen it in the way she watched the horizon, as if expecting someone familiar or dangerous to appear. He leaned forward slightly. "Do you think they might come looking for you?" Aiona shook her head. "If they survived, they have their own wounds to heal. No one would chase me across the plains. But I think about them, about what was lost, about what I could not save." She rarely spoke about the raid. Hearing her now made Elias understand how much she had carried alone. He recognized the tension in her voice, the same tension he felt whenever memories of his brother crept into his mind. Regret had a way of sitting on the chest like extra weight. "You did what you could," Elias said. "Survival isn't failure." She looked at him with a steady expression, as if measuring whether he truly believed the words or if he spoke them out of habit. When she saw the sincerity behind them, she nodded slightly. "What about you?" she asked. "You speak little of your past. Something holds you in this place, far from others." Elias hesitated. She had offered pieces of her history. It was fair that she wanted pieces of his. He took a slow breath, letting the warmth of the stove calm his restless thoughts. "I lost my brother," he said. "I was with him when it happened. I thought I could keep him safe. I was older, stronger, but I didn't see the danger soon enough. I blamed myself, and I couldn't stay around people who reminded me of him." Aiona listened without interrupting, her gaze fixed on him with quiet understanding. She didn't offer sympathy he couldn't accept. Instead, she asked the question he had avoided for years. "Do you still believe it was your fault?" He looked down at his hands. "I did for a long time. I'm not sure what I believe now." Her voice softened. "Mistakes do not take the whole person. They only make the path harder." The words settled in him. They had come from someone who had survived loss far greater than his own. Yet she spoke them calmly, without bitterness. Elias felt a shift inside himself, small but noticeable. As the storm strengthened, they both returned to their tasks. Hours passed. Aiona's pains came and went in short waves, and Elias quietly monitored her breathing without drawing attention to it. When she winced, he adjusted the logs in the stove to keep the room warmer. When she grew tired and leaned back, he retrieved an extra cushion for her chair. These gestures were simple, not grand, but each one added to a growing sense of stability between them. By evening, the storm finally eased. The wind fell silent, leaving only the crackle of the fire and the soft settling of fresh snow outside. Aiona closed her eyes for a moment, exhausted but calm. Elias watched her, realizing how different the cabin looked now. Where once it had been a shelter for himself alone, it had begun turning into a place shaped by two people, two pasts, two sets of fears, two quiet hopes. Aiona opened her eyes and spoke in a voice that held no uncertainty. "I can stay here without fear. The walls feel strong." Elias nodded, feeling a steady approval building inside him. "Good. You deserve a place that keeps you safe." She lifted the mended sleeve and handed it to him. "You deserve someone to stand in your home without walking away." He took the cloth slowly, feeling the meaning behind her words. The day had brought answers neither of them had been brave enough to ask before. Answers about trust, about safety, about what they were building together. The storm outside had passed, but the calm that settled in the cabin felt like something new, something earned, something solid. The storm left a clean stillness over the land the next morning. Thin sunlight glimmered across the snow, giving the fields a quieter look than usual. Elias stepped outside to check the horses, leaving Aiona inside warming herself by the stove. The cold bit sharply at his fingers as he brushed frost from the mare's mane. While he worked, he replayed the conversations they shared during the storm. Her story, her fears, her steady voice. Each detail strengthened the sense that they were becoming tied together by something more lasting than circumstance. He was tightening the latch on the barn door when he heard a horse approaching at a fast pace. The rhythm of the hooves was familiar enough to raise unease rather than curiosity. Elias stood upright, squinting into the pale light as a rider crossed the field. The man slowed only when he reached the fence line. It was Mason Crow. The sight of him brought a slow tightening across Elias's jaw. Mason had worked with Elias years ago during a cattle drive that ended in disaster. The same night, Elias's brother died. Mason had left town shortly after, carrying rumors and unfinished tensions behind him. Elias hadn't seen him since. Mason dismounted, brushing snow from his coat. "Didn't expect to find you living this far out," he said, his voice rough with the tone of someone who felt he deserved answers. Elias didn't reply immediately. "What do you want?" Mason leaned against the fence rail, taking in the sight of the cabin, the fields, the footprints leading to the barn. "Heard you've been keeping to yourself. Heard you took someone in." His eyes traveled toward the cabin door. "People in town talk." Elias stepped closer, blocking Mason's view of the house. "Speak your piece." Mason's expression tightened. "I came because of your brother. I heard you've convinced yourself you were the one who got him killed. That's not how it happened." Elias felt his stomach clench. "You weren't there when he fell." "No," Mason said, "but I was there when he made the choice to rush ahead. He didn't follow orders. He didn't wait for you. You've carried blame that isn't yours." Elias inhaled slowly, feeling old wounds press against the surface. The memory of his brother, laughing, stubborn, reckless, hit with a force he wasn't prepared for. Mason's words stirred emotions he had buried so deeply that he barely recognized them now. "You came all this way to tell me that?" Elias asked. Mason's gaze flicked again toward the cabin. "I also came to warn you. Some folks don't like the idea of you keeping an Apache woman in your home. They're stirring up talk, trying to decide whether they should deal with it themselves." The bitterness in his voice suggested he didn't support the idea, but didn't expect others to behave well either. Elias felt a hard, cold anger settle inside him. He had expected judgment from town, but not escalation. "Who's talking like that?" "Men who drink more than they think," Mason answered. "Men who look for excuses to act brave." "I'm not here to fight your battles, Elias, but you should know trouble can find you even when you're trying to start over." Elias stepped closer. "She's under my protection. No one comes near her." Mason studied him with a mixture of respect and something more complicated. "You mean to keep her here? As your wife?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation, surprising even himself with its certainty. Mason nodded once, then turned back to his horse. "You've changed," Mason said quietly. "Maybe for the better." Elias didn't respond. He watched Mason ride off, the snow lifting beneath the horse's hooves until the figure disappeared across the field. When the sound faded completely, Elias released a slow breath, realizing how tightly he'd been holding it. He returned to the cabin, wiping frost from his beard before stepping inside. Aiona was seated at the table, slicing dried meat into thin strips. She looked up immediately. "Someone rode to the fence," she said. "I heard voices." Elias removed his coat and sat across from her. He didn't want to alarm her, but he refused to hide the truth from her either. "A man I once worked with came by. He brought news that some people are speaking against you being here." Ahiona's hand stilled, the knife pausing above the cutting board. "Do they intend harm?" "They talk more than they act," Elias said, though the certainty in his words wasn't complete. "But I won't let anyone near you." She watched him carefully, measuring the steadiness in his tone. I knew the world outside my home would be difficult, she said. This is not new to me. I know, but it shouldn't fall on you alone. She resumed, slicing the meat, slower this time. Why did your brother's death make you leave others behind? Elias leaned back in his chair. Mason's visit had unsettled everything he had kept buried. I believed I failed him. I thought everyone saw me as the reason he didn't come back. Leaving felt easier than facing it. And now, she asked, now I'm starting to see I may not have understood things as clearly as I believed. Aiona nodded, absorbing the information with quiet reflection. Pain changes memories. It makes everything sharp and unclear at the same time. He watched the way she spoke, calm despite her history. She had walked through fires he never imagined, yet she held herself with a strength that made his own burdens feel less impossible to face. After preparing the meal, she divided the portions and set a plate before him. Eat, she said. You have a long day ahead if there are threats outside. Her calmness steadied him more than she realized. He ate beside her, the heat of the food easing the tension that remained in his muscles. Later, when the sun lowered and the fire grew brighter, Elias stood by the window, looking out across the snow-covered field. Aiona folded blankets behind him, her movements slow but deliberate. He spoke without turning. Whatever comes, you won't face it alone. Aiona paused her work. Then we can endure it. Her voice carried no fear, only resolve. The cabin felt different that night. The storm had brought them closer, but Mason's arrival had forced the truth of Elias's past into the open and revealed the danger surrounding them. Answers had taken shape in the gaps between their words. Answers about trust, about protection, and about the depth of the commitment forming between them. For the first time, Elias understood that protecting her was not just a duty, but a choice he intended to keep. The next days settled into a slower rhythm, as if the land itself understood that too much had stirred beneath the surface. Elias spent the early mornings reinforcing the fence line and checking the trails around the property. He returned each time with the same report. No riders, no signs of disturbance, only the usual tracks left by deer and the wind. Still, he kept watch. The idea that someone might come looking for trouble stayed with him like an instinct he couldn't ignore. Inside the cabin, Aiona moved with steady purpose, though her steps carried the weight of her growing belly. She cleaned the shelves, organized food in the pantry, and stitched new ties onto the blankets they would soon need. Every now and then she paused, a hand on her stomach, waiting for a pang to ease. Elias observed without hovering, noting each detail, her endurance, her fatigue, her careful assessment of the space that was becoming her home. One afternoon, he found her outside, brushing snow off the porch despite the cold. You shouldn't be lifting anything, he said, taking the broom from her hands. I am only sweeping, she replied, though her body leaned slightly as if grateful for the support. I lived alone for many seasons. My hands do not rest easily. He understood the unspoken truth. She needed to feel useful, needed to shape the world around her rather than sit still in fear of it. Let me do this, Elias said. You should keep warm. She hesitated before stepping back inside, but the look she gave him was not frustration. It was trust, slowly forming through small exchanges. Later, as the sun reached its peak, they worked together in a barn. The air smelled of hay and cold soil, and shafts of light slipped between the boards. Aiona inspected the blankets stored for the horses while Elias checked the straps and tack. He glanced at her occasionally, noticing how she studied everything as if preparing to live through harsher months. She had survived long enough to understand that winter demanded readiness. Will the child come before the thaw? She asked quietly. Most likely, Elias said. We'll have everything prepared by then. You'll have what you need. She ran her fingers over the soft wool of a blanket, her expression thoughtful. I have wondered, what name will we give a child? Names carry stories. They tie a person to those who came before. It was a question she had kept to herself until now, and Elias knew she was trying to understand how their worlds would combine. He leaned against a post, considering her words. We can choose together, he said. Something that belongs to both of us. The answer seemed to settle something inside her. She nodded and folded the blanket carefully. As the afternoon passed, Elias took her to the back field to examine the soil that would need planting in the spring. Aiona walked slowly along the edge, dragging her hand across the dry grass. "This land feels strong," she said. "It listens to the weather and bends without breaking." Elias watched her movements, struck by how naturally she assessed the space around her. "You understand the land better than I do." "My people lived through seasons by reading it," she replied. "I learned young how to watch the wind, how to follow the trails of small animals, how to find water when the ground gives nothing easily." Her gaze lowered slightly. "But I have not used those skills since I fled my home. I feared losing them." "You haven't," Elias said. "They're part of you." Her eyes met his briefly, gratitude flickering there. As they walked back toward the cabin, Aiona asked a question she had avoided until now. "What will you expect of me as your wife?" Elias slowed his steps. "Nothing you don't choose. You don't owe me anything. I asked you to be my wife because I want you safe, not because I want to control your life." She considered his answer carefully. "In my village, a wife and husband share duties. They protected each other, but they also spoke their fears openly. They did not hide their thoughts." He gave a small nod. "I'll give you honesty. I won't hide what I feel." She touched her stomach, a faint movement beneath her hand. "Then we will learn how to be a family." In the evening, the light turned pale gold over the fields. Elias prepared supper, while Aiona rested in the chair near the stove. She watched him cut vegetables with slow, controlled movements. The quiet between them had grown warm, less guarded, more like two people adjusting their lives to fit together. When they sat down to eat, Aiona asked, "Will the men who speak against me come here?" Elias didn't answer immediately. He didn't want to frighten her, but he also knew she deserved clarity. "If they do, they won't get past the fence," he said. "But I'll speak to the sheriff soon. I won't let rumors turn into danger." She accepted this with a steady breath. "I'm not afraid of those men. I'm only afraid of bringing trouble to your door." "You're not," Elias said. "You belong here." The room grew quiet except for the soft crackling of the fire. Aiona looked at him for a long moment, as if searching for the sincerity behind every word. When she found it, her expression softened. By the time the stars appeared, Aiona had fallen asleep in the chair. Elias placed a blanket over her shoulders and paused before moving away. Seeing her rest so deeply brought a sense of purpose that surprised him. Her presence filled the cabin with something he had not felt in years: stability, warmth, a reason to keep going. He stepped outside, scanning the horizon for any movement. The land stretched out quiet and undisturbed, touched only by moonlight. For the first time, he felt certain he could build a future here, not alone, but with her. The days that followed brought a lighter calm, though both Elias and Aiona carried the memory of the rider's visit like a shadow that stretched behind them. Elias kept a close watch on the land, walking the fence line every morning and checking for any sign of tracks that did not belong there. Each day he returned with the same answer. The ridge was quiet, the fields undisturbed. The men had not come back. Ahiona's body, however, was entering a different kind of urgency. Her steps grew slower, the weight of her pregnancy more visible with each sunrise. She often paused mid-task, pressing a hand to her side as sharp pains came in short waves. Elias noticed every wince. He tried not to hover, but his concern deepened with each passing day. One morning, as she tried to lift a small bucket of water, he moved toward her quickly and took it from her hands. "You shouldn't be carrying anything heavy now." "I am fine," she insisted, though her breath came unevenly. "I only need to keep moving." "You need rest," he replied, gentler this time. "The child is close." "I can see it." She lowered her gaze, accepting the truth reluctantly. Aiona had lived most of her life relying on her own strength. Letting someone else carry the weight for her still felt unfamiliar. But she moved to the chair near the stove, settling in with controlled breaths. Elias poured water into a pot and set it to boil. "Tell me when the pain started." "Yesterday," she said. "They come and go, sometimes far apart, sometimes closer. It is not time yet, but it is near." He nodded, tension tightening in his chest. He had helped deliver calves, not children. He feared failing her in ways that could not be undone. To prepare himself, he gathered supplies with quiet urgency: clean cloth, boiled water, herbs she said would ease pain. Aiona guided him with simple instructions, her voice steady even when discomfort pulled at her. "You do not need to fear this," she said. "Women carry life the same way for generations. The body knows the path." "My fear isn't about the birth," Elias replied quietly. "It's about you." Aiona watched him for a moment, studying the unease he tried to hide. "I'm not fragile," she said. "I have survived storms far worse than this." "I know," he answered, "but I want you safe." Her expression softened, the corners of her eyes relaxing. She touched his wrist gently, an acknowledgement of the commitment he had carried silently these past weeks. As the day wore on, the pains deepened. Aiona braced herself against the table more often, her breath shorter. She tried to continue sewing small baby clothes from leftover fabric, but the needle slipped too many times. Finally, she set it aside, her voice strained. "I must rest now." Elias helped her to the bed. She lay back, adjusting her breathing, focusing on steady rhythms. Elias stayed near the door, watching over her without intruding. Every part of him tightened each time she grimaced. Between breaths, she spoke softly. "In my village, women were never alone when a child came. There were mothers and sisters, voices that brought strength." Her eyes shifted toward him. "Here, it is only you." "I'll stay," Elias said. "Every moment you need me. I won't step away." Something eased in her shoulders, a quiet acceptance of the bond forming between them. Later in the afternoon, the sheriff arrived on horseback, riding slowly up the path. Elias met him outside, careful not to disturb Aiona. The sheriff removed his hat, his face showing no hostility. "Heard some men rode up here causing trouble," he said. "Wanted to see if everything is in order." "It is," Elias answered. "But I appreciate you coming." The sheriff nodded. "I spoke to the men in town, told them not to take matters into their own hands again. If they have concerns, they come to me first. They won't trouble you further." Elias felt a rare sense of relief. "Thank you." The sheriff glanced toward the house. "Your woman all right? Folks said she's expecting." "Yes," Elias replied, though the worry in his voice was hard to hide. "It will be soon." "Well," the sheriff said, adjusting his reins, "if you need a doctor, send word. But I know you're far out here. Do what you can." When the sheriff rode away, Elias returned inside. Aiona was awake, her breathing shallow but controlled. "Was someone here?" she asked. "The sheriff," Elias said. "He won't allow anyone to bother us again." Aiona nodded, closing her eyes briefly. "Good. I do not want trouble to meet the child at the door." As evening settled, Elias lit lanterns around the room to keep the light steady. The cabin felt warmer now, filled with anticipation rather than fear. Aiona shifted positions carefully, her face tightening as another contraction passed. "It is close," she whispered. Elias sat beside her, placing a steady hand near her arm, not touching her unless she wanted it, simply making his presence known. Her breaths came deeper now, and he matched his own to her rhythm, grounding himself to support her when the moment arrived. Outside, the land stretched into quiet darkness, untouched and calm. Inside, the room tightened with approaching life. They were no longer bracing against the world. They were preparing to bring someone into it. The contractions strengthened through the night, turning the cabin into a place where every breath, every movement, and every quiet sound mattered. Elias stayed beside Aiona, moving only when she asked for water or needed another cloth warmed by the stove. The lanterns cast steady light across the room, showing the strain building in her features and the determination that anchored her through each wave of pain. Aiona gripped the edge of the blanket, her breaths short and tight. "It is coming faster now," she said, her voice roughened by exhaustion. Elias steadied himself. "Just tell me what you need. You are here. That is enough." Her words carried a steadiness that surprised him, even as sweat gathered across her brow and the strain pulled at her shoulders. He had prepared for this moment as best he could: boiled water, clean cloth, blankets, and the courage to stay calm when she needed him solid. But nothing could fully prepare him for the sight of her enduring pain with such fierce resolve. A contraction seized her and pulled her body forward. Elias moved closer, offering his hand for her to brace herself. She took it, gripping hard, grounding her strength against the stability of his arm. He didn't flinch. He welcomed the weight, the trust, the need. Between breaths, she spoke. "If something happens, if I do not." He cut her off, voice low and steady. "You'll be fine. Both of you." She looked at him with a mix of fear and resolve. "Life can turn quickly. I know this." "So do I," he admitted, "but not this time." The reassurance wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, certain, and real. She eased back, letting those words sit inside her as another contraction rose. Hours passed, the sky outside fading from night to the first hints of dawn. The sound of wind brushing against the cabin walls blended with Aiona's strained breaths. Elias kept track of her pain, the time between contractions, the clarity of her voice. She grew more focused, her strength pushing through exhaustion. At one point, she whispered something in her native language, words Elias didn't know but understood were meant for comfort or endurance. He placed a damp cloth on her forehead, adjusting the blankets around her to keep her warm. When she lifted her eyes again, she asked, "Are you afraid?" He considered the question honestly. "Yes, but staying with you is stronger than the fear." A faint, tired smile touched her lips before another contraction took hold. She cried out this time, the sound raw, but her body followed the instinctive rhythm of labor. Elias supported her shoulders, helping her shift into a better position, following every instruction she gave him. The moments tightened, the contractions closer, the strain sharper. "It is time," she said, her voice trembling with urgency. Elias moved into place, steadying himself for the final part. He followed her breathing, encouraging her gently, staying calm even when his heart raced with adrenaline. Sweat gathered across his forehead as he focused on her cues, listening to every message her body sent. Aiona pushed through the agony, her grip strong on his hand, her strength rising from a place deeper than fear or exhaustion. Minutes stretched long and heavy until suddenly, a small, sharp cry filled the room. Aiona leaned back, tears filling her eyes, though exhaustion blurred her expression. Elias lifted the tiny body carefully, his hands trembling as he wrapped the newborn in a clean cloth. The child was small, warm, and alive, his cry loud enough to shake the quiet morning. "It's a boy," Elias said softly. Ahiona's eyes opened wider, softening with relief and disbelief. He placed the baby in her arms, and she cradled him with instinctive tenderness. The child's cries eased as he settled against her chest, sensing her warmth and her heartbeat. Ahiona's voice broke as she spoke. "He is strong." Elias sat beside her, unable to take his eyes off the child. His throat tightened with emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: relief, awe, and a kind of love that rose quickly and unexpectedly. "He is," Elias whispered. Ahiona studied Elias's face, noticing the mix of fear and wonder still lingering there. "You will be a good father," she said quietly. He shook his head once, not in refusal, but in disbelief. "I don't know how, but I'll learn. I'll be here for him. For you." She rested her head back on the pillow, the exhaustion settling deep, but her eyes stayed open long enough to meet his. "You already are." The cabin fell into a gentle silence, broken only by the soft breaths of the newborn against her skin. Dawn's early light entered the room through the thin curtains, illuminating the three of them together for the first time. Elias reached out and touched the baby's small hand, feeling the tiny fingers curl around his. In that moment, something shifted inside him, a weight lifting, a new purpose settling into place. The past no longer held the same power. The future no longer felt hollow. The child's grip was small, but it anchored them both. The morning light grew stronger as the hours passed, filling the cabin with a steady brightness that softened the strain of the long night. Aiona slept lightly, her body exhausted but peaceful, while the newborn rested against her chest with small, steady breaths. Elias sat nearby, his chair pulled close to the bed, unwilling to step too far from them. He had never held such responsibility in his hands, yet the fear that once gripped him now felt different, no longer paralyzing, but grounding. When Aiona finally stirred, she opened her eyes to find Elias watching over them. She lifted the child slightly, adjusting his blanket, and spoke in a tired but warm voice. "He slept well." "So did you," Elias said, though he knew she had spent the night drifting in and out of restless half-sleep, still recovering from the labor. She looked down at the infant again, studying his face as if memorizing every small detail. The soft dark hair, the steady breaths, the warmth radiating from his tiny body. Each part of him filled the room with a sense of calm that neither she nor Elias had known in a long time. "We should give him a name," Elias said quietly. Aiona nodded. "In my village, names were chosen from the strength we hoped the child would carry. A name could guide a life." Elias waited. He wanted the name to come from her, from the part of her past she still carried with pride and grief. She ran a finger along the child's cheek. "His name will be Nantan," she said. "It means leader or brave one." Elias repeated it softly, letting the sound settle. Nantan. The name felt right. Strong. Certain. Aiona looked at Elias, searching his face. "Does the name belong here?" "It belongs to him," Elias answered. "And he belongs here." Aiona's shoulders eased, the reassurance sinking into her. She shifted the baby gently into Elias's arms. Elias froze for a moment, afraid of holding him wrong, but Aiona guided his hands into the proper position. When Nantan settled against his chest, something warm and grounding pushed deep into Elias's chest. The infant's small weight filled a space he didn't know remained empty. He held the child carefully, afraid of breathing too harshly, yet unable to look away. Aiona watched them together, quiet emotion rising in her eyes. "He will know your strength," she said, "and your kindness." Elias swallowed, struggling to speak. "I'll do right by him. I swear it." The day passed with a calm rhythm, feeding the baby, letting Aiona rest, boiling water, checking the horses, returning to watch over them again. Elias carried every task with a new purpose shaping his movements. For the first time, he felt he belonged exactly where he stood. By late afternoon, the sheriff returned to check on them. He dismounted slowly, respectful of the quiet inside the cabin. "Just wanted to be sure things are well," he said. Elias opened the door wider so the sheriff could see the small bundle in Aiona's arms. She nodded at him in greeting. "Well, look at that," the sheriff said with a gentle smile. "A strong boy. Congratulations to both of you." Aiona thanked him softly, and Elias walked the sheriff back outside. Snow still lined the ground, but the sky was clear, a sign that no more storms threatened them. The sheriff's tone shifted slightly. "I spoke again with the men who caused trouble. They won't bother you anymore. Folks settle down when they see a family forming. It reminds them you're not here to cause harm." Elias nodded. "We won't be leaving." "I didn't expect you would," the sheriff said. "You've made a life out here. Looks like you've got reason to keep building." When the sheriff rode away, Elias felt a weight lift, one he had carried since the first whispers in town began. He returned inside to find Aiona sitting near the fire with Nantan resting against her shoulder. She was humming softly, a rhythmic tone from her childhood, something carried across generations. The sound was gentle, steady, and familiar even to ears that did not know the words. She looked up as Elias approached. "Did he say more trouble would come?" "No," Elias said. "He said we're safe." Aiona let out a long breath, the tension finally releasing from her body. She shifted the baby into a cradle made from soft blankets, then leaned back against the chair with tired relief. "Then we can begin," she said simply. Elias sat beside her. "Begin what?" "A life," she replied. "Not running, not hiding, just living." He took her hand, unsure if the gesture was welcome, but she curled her fingers around his. The connection felt natural now, shaped by everything they had endured. Her hand was warm, strong, and steady. What kind of life do you want? Elias asked. One where my child grows without fear, she answered. One where we stand together, not because we are forced to, but because we choose it. Elias nodded slowly. Then that's what we'll build. The words were simple, but they carried a promise that settled firmly in both of them. There was no uncertainty, no lingering hesitation. They had crossed too many hardships, shared too much pain, and found too much strength in one another to question the path forward. As night approached, Aiona carried Nantan to the bed and lay beside him, watching his tiny chest rise and fall. Elias sat at the edge of the mattress, gently brushing a blanket into place. Aiona spoke softly, her voice heavy with contentment. I did not think I would find a home again. You did, Elias said. And so did I. She closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her towards sleep. Nantan curled closer against her, the new life between them sealing the bond they had formed in silence, danger, and unwavering resolve. Elias lay beside them, listening to the quiet breaths of the two people who had changed everything in his world. There were no doubts left, no unfinished questions, no threats lingering beyond the walls. Only the steady beat of a new beginning. The cabin, once a place of solitude, now held a family, complete, warm, and whole. Their story had reached its end, not in loss or uncertainty, but in the simple truth they had worked to claim. They stayed. They healed. They built a life together.